So the first question I want to put forward is, maybe the first topic I want to discuss with you, is this expression that's sometimes being mentioned, that is paradigm shift. Anyone heard of the paradigm shift? No? Yes, you did. And anyone knows who invented this concept, where it originates? No? Okay. So there was this historian of science, Thomas Kuhn. Anyone heard of Thomas Kuhn? Yeah. Who did? Okay, great. Anyone else? Yes, excellent. So, and he wrote this very famous book, one of the foundational books for history of science, but also important beyond. That is with the title "The Structure of Scientific Revolutions." Now, how many people here are from art and science? Yeah, great. I mean, I think you definitely need to read that. No, I think anyone should read this book. It's a very it's somehow so fundamental to the way we think about knowledge in contemporary environment that this the main concept that this book puts forward, the concept of the paradigm shift, became so broadly used in everyday parlance and everyday conversation that we very generally don't acknowledge where it originates from. But paradigm shift. You have heard this expression. Yeah? So that's where it's coming from. Now, the interesting thing about Thomas Kuhn is that he's a kind of accidental hero. He was a historian of science, and he was looking at how scientific discoveries happen. He was asking a kind of a simple question: how science advances? Because it seems like almost an unnecessary question, because everyone seems to understand that scientists make their experiments, and everyone works on a tiny bit of the world or knowledge, on one chromosome or on one, on gas or on whatever. And gradually, knowledge accumulates, and as it accumulates, new understandings emerge. So there is a kind of, we all have this a gradual image of science advancing by accumulation of knowledge, and previous ideas get refuted as we get better at understanding, as our instruments get better. So, but when Thomas Kuhn started to look at the facts via examining archives of scientific work, he arrived at a quite different understanding of how science develops. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about Thomas Kuhn's notion of the scientific revolution, and you might be wondering what that has to do with the question of the image and art. But once we understand a little better what the notion of the paradigm shift does, how does it work, we might be able then to understand in what way the notion of paradigm shift operates in relation to art. Because the thesis I'm proposing to you, what I'm trying to suggest, is that there is a paradigm shift happening with art right now. You are living. You are, in a sense, the embodiment of this paradigm shift. But to get to that, we need to first figure out what Thomas Kuhn has in mind when he talks about scientific revolutions. So, in Thomas Kuhn's model, this is what happens. So there will be long periods where science barely changes. He calls it normal science. For hundreds of years, scientists might be working with more or less the same concepts about what is nature, what is the role of the scientist, what is the role of experiment, observation, test, and whatever. And for a very long time, there is a kind of plateau information accumulates, but it accumulates within the same kind of on a horizontal level. It increases, yeah, but in a sense it doesn't grow. So we get more knowledge of similar kind. Yeah, so we discover more plants, we discover more minerals, we discover more gases, and they all fit within the same conception of what is a plant, what is a mineral, what is a gas. Yeah, we just get more of those. That is normal science, and the development is by accumulation. Yeah, so if you look back 100 years ago, we knew about fewer plants, we knew about fewer animals, or more animals as the case might be, because they're getting extinct. We knew about perhaps fewer gases and fewer particles in the atom. And now we have more of all of this, but the development is simply accumulation of knowledge which is on the same level. And then, from time to time, but not very often, something happens. He calls it a revolution. When a revolution happens, everything is thrown up in the air. Someone appears, or for whatever reason, suddenly a number of people start to do science completely differently. They throw away the old categories. They refuse, for instance, to distinguish between the scientist and the subject of observation, as the previous scientists always, held sacred. They refuse, for instance, to say that an animal and a mineral are two separate things, or they just start doing science differently. And when that happens, a revolution takes place. When a revolution takes place, then these few people who are leading it inspire a whole lot of other people to start doing science in a different way, because it is much more exciting. And it's not that everyone sticks with the revolution. There will always be people who will continue accumulating knowledge in the previous way. It's just that people just stop being interested in what they have to say, and they gradually die out and disappear. And then this revolutionary science becomes the normal science of its day. And again, for a long time, people just accumulate knowledge in the frameworks that these few mavericks established at a certain point. So post-revolution, we get another normal science. Okay, so first I need to stop it from going to sleep. That is that. Now I need to come back.
Where does the actual name come from?
Name of what? Paradigm shift from Thomas Kuhn.
What you actually make a word up? It's a brand new word, or
Well, paradigm is not a new word. is a Greek word, and shift is not a new word. But this is an expression that he coined. Okay, so this is a structure of scientific revolutions. This is the paradigm shift. Now, these are just a couple of examples. It could be that I got the Chinese word slightly wrong. Did I get them wrong?
A little bit, but it's okay.
Well, maybe you help me to fix them,
Yeah.
so I will not be embarrassed next time. Okay, so for instance, kind of Western science, as we know it, begins with Aristotelian physics. Yeah. Now, Aristotelian physics, which was a very successful model of physics and lasted for more than 1,000 years, divided all materials into 4 categories. So you have hot, wet, dry, and cold. And Aristotle said that everything is a combination of these qualities. So you take wood, for instance, wood, like the wooden floor. Wood is cold and wet. You take fire. Fire is hot and dry. You take air. Air is cold and dry. Yeah. And so every physical object you encounter could be analyzed according to these 4 categories. Now, that was the basis of the Aristotelian scientific model, and as I said, it was incredibly successful for 1,500 years or so. People used this model, and obviously the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Cities were built, dams were built, bridges over rivers, roads. So it was a good science. It worked, So this model, which seems quite strange to us today, was effective. Yeah, there was another element. There was the ether, which was the substance which is above the air that envelopes the earth, the ether, the quintessence. Now, interestingly, in the Chinese scientific model, it was in the classical Chinese scientific model, there is a very similar division into 4 elements, into wood, fire, earth, and water, and metal. So this was the basis of scientific work for a long time. And then, in the Middle Ages, the whole body of medical knowledge, the whole body of medicine was built on hot, wet, cold, and dry as well. If you if you were ill, you went to the doctor, they diagnosed your illness based on this model. So you could either have yellow bile, or blood, or blood bile, or phlegm. And these were the main forms of illness that doctors knew how to recognize. Of course, until not very long, medicine was practically useless. It did very, very little. But people still practiced, and they let blood, and they treated people based on this model. If you look at Shakespeare's plays, for instance, he talks a lot about phlegm or about yellow bile, because this understanding of the body as being made of these 4 elements was very powerful. So this model continued up until the moment that we now know as the scientific revolution, which is the 17th century. And in the 17th century, around the time of Galileo and Newton and Kepler and Copernicus, suddenly this kind of bunch of young people arrive on the scene, and they want to do a different science. They don't want to talk anymore about hot, wet, dry, and cold. They want to talk about velocity, acceleration, position, momentum. Yeah? And because they want to look at matter, not in terms of whether it's cold or dry, but whether it is in rest or in movement, the same matter, yeah? The same sort of cannonball or a piece of wood. They're not interested whether it's cold or dry. They want to know whether it is in movement or whether it is at rest. And if it is in movement, what force was applied to it to make it move? And if it is, and also if it is in movement, how long will it move before it will come to rest? So suddenly they have a different model with which to investigate the same matter. And then, because you have now velocity, acceleration, position, and momentum, you have Newton's famous 3 laws of motion. Do you know them? Some of you. None of you. Okay. Well, these are the basic, the 3 laws of motion. But if you don't know them, go to Wikipedia and read about them. They're quite lovely, actually. They really are very poetic. So the first law of motion is that every body perseveres in its state of rest or of uniform motion in a right line, unless it is compelled to change its state by focus imposed upon it. It is from the Principia Mathematica, and of course originally Newton wrote it in Latin, but I'm giving it to you in English. And the second law of motion is F equals ma, which means that force equals mass multiplied by acceleration. And the third is that to every action there is always opposed and equal reaction. This you probably heard, no? To every action there is opposed and equal reaction. So for instance, if you stand on a boat by the pier, and you want to step from the boat onto the pier, as you do it, the boat goes back. You know, if you're not careful, you fall into the boat. Yeah? Because your action caused the opposite reaction. Yeah? So when this bunch of scientists started to approach, started to do science based on these principles, a completely new scientific model emerged. And then what happened? Then they were, of course, revolutionaries. What happened to those of their colleagues who still wanted to do hot, dry, wet, and cold? Nothing happened to them. Just no one was interested, and they just quietly died out, lonely and sulking, probably, feeling deeply misunderstood. Now, that was the 17th century, and this way of doing science continued well into the 19th century until people like, well, it's a quite slightly longer story, but until people like Maxwell, and then Planck, and then Einstein, and then Niels Bohr, and then Heisenberg, and then Schrödinger started to do a different form of physics. They didn't want to use velocity, acceleration, position, and momentum, but wanted to use quanta. Now, we're not going to get into the quantum physics right now. We will talk about it perhaps later. But the point is that this revolutionary way of making science also became a traditional way, and for 200-300 years, people just accumulated knowledge based on the Newtonian laws of physics, happily adding, continuing to investigate in this way. But at some point, another revolution happened. When Maxwell wrote his formulas of electromagnetism, it was quite clear that they don't fully sit well with the Newtonian laws of motion, and a kind of paradox started to emerge. And in order to solve it, Einstein developed his theory of relativity that was trying to accommodate both Newtonian physics and Maxwell's understanding of electromagnetism. That is not in itself important. It's not the facts of these revolutions which interest me right now. But just so you get the idea that science, according to Thomas Kuhn, scientific progress is linear, then there is an explosion, things change, then linear again, then explosion, things change, linear again. Now, so I think for every scientist it becomes quite important to think on what part of this curve they find themselves, because you cannot control the moment of your birth. You don't know, you cannot decide where to be born. You are born at a certain time, and you become a scientist at a particular point. Are you at the time of a gradual increase in knowledge? Are you at a time of a revolution? Yeah, that becomes kind of interesting question to ask. And that's really all I wanted to say about the Thomas Kuhn's scientific revolution. And now I don't want to talk about science anymore. I want to talk about how the same understanding can be applied to the question of art. How can we use the notion of the paradigm shift to understand what is happening with artistic creation? So, anyone knows this? Anyone knows who is the author? Yes? Who?
I know this.
Do you know who?
I mean, it's a classical icon.
It is an icon Orthodox. Yeah, it's true. It's the Greek Orthodox, and whom by? Who painted it? Who is the author?
who paint that?
Yes,
Somebody.
that's right. But who?
Yeah. I mean, the artists generally who paint the icons, they're not very famous. They're not very popular.
This one is very famous.
Yeah, I don't know.
His name is Rublev.
Ah,
Okay, so I mean allegedly, of course, because they, as you rightly say, they didn't sign their name.
No.
No, but that is Rublev. Now, this is a very famous religious painting by Rublev, 13th or 14th century. I'm not sure right now exactly, and that depicts the three angels. This is a really terrible reproduction of it, but it's a marvelous, marvelous work. Now, the point that I'm making is that for a long time, this was how painting was made. Painting was a vehicle for devotion. It was basically a spiritual practice. Not to paint was a spiritual practice. To paint was to pray. Painting was a form of prayer. It was a form of communion with God. So painters like Rublev were themselves deeply religious, and their painting was an expression of their faith. Because their painting was an expression of their faith, these paintings were later used in the religious setting as objects of prayer. Now, to this day, if you go, for instance, to Italy and you want to see some famous paintings, you will find them just in a church above an altar, and you will see actually people who go to see this painting don't go to look at it as museum goers, but they go to pray to it. Yeah. So paintings to this day in many places perform this religious function. Yeah. You might be the only person looking at it because it's a Caravaggio, but for other people, you know, it's an expression of a spiritual devotion. Yeah. So people were painting like this for a very long time, and then something happens, and this starts to happen. This kind of painting starts to happen. This, I think, is Jacques-Louis David, and that is the Death of Socrates. And what this painting is showing is Socrates, the Greek philosopher, being told by the court of Athens that he must kill himself as a punishment for teaching youth how to be insubordinate to their parents. And here he's taking the poison, and he is about to drink it while still talking with his disciples. So now, how do we get from this to this? That's where the essay I asked you to read by Jean-Francois Lyotard, Representation, Presentation, Unpresentable, will come in handy. Did you get the reading? I didn't ask you if you read it. I can get that. I can guess the answer to that. Did you? Are you aware that they exist? Yeah. So you have all three now for all 3 weeks. Everyone? Yes. Okay. Now they shall post. They shall yes.
I think our class didn't get them.
No.
It seems like
Sorry.
We didn't.
You didn't get it? They were. Anyone didn't get it? It was supposed to be on Moodle.
there was a thing that was on Moodle that it was taken down for some reason. So
Right.
it might be worth it.
Because I checked. I'm not putting it, but I checked on Friday, and it was there.
It was there, just the title of what to read, but it didn't have the actual text.
Okay.
It was there at the beginning of last term.
At the beginning
Right.
of last term, they were all listed.
We got it from Fine Art, and Alex also sent it out to us.
Just the Heidegger. Who done
He
it?
didn't.
No, the Lyotard we've received.
It's at the end.
Here, here, and here. It's all here. I'm now looking at the fine art.
Yeah, I think it was someone from another course who said they didn't receive it. We did receive it.
Okay, so fine art received it. You received it.
No, I,
Yeah, we received it.
none of us.
You did receive it. Okay, but art and science, did you get it?
Don't know.
What's the course? You guys yeah, photography didn't receive it.
Photography here it is.
Huh? Did you
But here it is. Why you say it's not here?
somebody in
Huh? Well, it is here. So everyone got it. Okay. Did you see where it is on Moodle? It's under the philosophies of the contemporary image section of your Moodle. It's all there. So it will help you if you read this material for the next session. Okay, so just back to. Okay, so we established that the readings are there on Moodle. You maybe didn't get an email about it, even though I think that Palev did send emails, but it is all there. With the Lyotard, I sent you the whole book. You only ask you to read this one essay, but the whole book is excellent. So if you are interested in questions of post-human time, computers, Jean-Francois Lyotard, whose essay we're discussing today, yes, he is. Anyone heard the name Lyotard before? Yeah. He is very well known, especially for a little book he wrote at the request of the Canadian government that was called Postmodernism, the report of knowledge. In essence, Lyotard invented the term postmodernism. He coined it. So everything postmodern is we owe to Lyotard, and I think he is a really outstanding philosopher. Not very well, not as much read as, for instance, Deleuze, Guattari, and Foucault, but incredibly interesting. And he's fantastic writing about art. His writing about art always draws your attention. And we're going to look at another text by Lyotard in the third session of his essay, "The Sublime and the Avant-Garde," when we look at the event. But so how do we get from this Rublev's icon to this Jacques-Louis David painting? How does that happen? So, in essence, for a very long time, painting was a religious practice. As I said, it was a form of spiritual devotion. And then a bunch of mavericks started to do painting differently. Now, of course, there are various, reasons for that. They all come together. Lyotard prefers to look at it as an expression of a specific political belief, which I think is very interesting. He basically says that in this icon by Rublev expresses a worldview in which at the center of the universe there is the presence of God. God is the force that makes the world operate. So the image itself is directly addressing God, because God is everywhere and not in one point. The image doesn't need to have perspective, because God is not standing at a certain point from which he or she or whatever, they will be looking at it. So, as you can see, it almost looks that the perspective is kind of turned inside out. Instead of following geometrical lines of perspective, the image kind of opens up to everywhere. Then, let's just skip that. And in the painting by Jacques-Louis David, which is, let's say, 300-400 years later, something completely different is taking place. The first thing we notice is that it really is designed for a human audience. It's designed for a human being to look at. How do we know that? It presupposes a certain vantage point from which the image looks absolutely realistic. So you need to stand right in front of it, perhaps at a certain distance, and you can find a point at which it is, which mimics the point at which the artist stands in relation to the canvas when they paint it, where the image looks at its best. It's absolutely, it's the most full, everything is fully coming together. And that is the second point about this image, is how it's all completely homogeneous. Everything belongs together. There's no single part, there's no one part that doesn't belong. If you, again, compare to Rubliov, there is a kind of sense that it's not trying to represent a real situation. It's not trying to convince you that that's really what the angels look like, and that's really how they were sitting. It's not attempting to do that. Now, Lyotard's argument is that it's not because people didn't know how to do it, it's that they didn't need to do it. They didn't need to represent things accurately. It's not that they were less good at painting. It's that they had a completely different goal. It's like the Aristotelian physics and the Newtonian physics. Their goal was not to depict a scene accurately, was not to convince you that, yeah, you should believe in God because look, I have a photograph here of an angel coming down, that really happened. They didn't have this kind of thinking. In a sense, the painting here is spirituality itself. It's not representing what it's like to be spiritual. It's not representing what angels look like. It's showing you devotion. And the argument behind this painting is, I could make it so beautiful because of my faith. It's my faith that guides my hand. Yeah? So, back to Jacques-Louis David. And here we have a very different line of reasoning behind the painting. The painting is saying, I show you a scene from the past exactly as it happened. That's what it looked like. And the reason I'm able to do it is because I have all the knowledge of optics and perspective and mathematics and geometry in my command. And I'm able to draw it so it's almost as if you are there in the prison cell with Socrates as one of his disciples. You know, you are present there. There is no talk of God anymore. The artist's role is not devotion. The artist's role is the embodiment of the scientific knowledge. The same scientific knowledge that allows Newton to calculate velocity and acceleration, the same knowledge gives the painter the ability to make this accurate representation. That's where the word representation appears. And another point that Lyotard is making in this essay, which I think is quite marvelous, is that he says, notice how everything belongs together. Every part of the image is like a piece of puzzle that together they form the whole. Nothing is outside of one single narrative. And that is, here there is a political message, because this image speaks about a point of view that of a citizen or a ruler, that you look down and you see the whole of your little universe arranged in front of you, and it all makes sense. Everything is entirely rationally placed in this image. There's nothing that is irrational, there's nothing that doesn't fit. So, the political message here, yes?
Isn't it cut this image?
Excuse me?
Here here isn't it cut the image on the
Cut.
yes, the legs or
Well, that's how the painting is.
ah okay. I thought it's stranded on the left you just see two ends.
That's the painting.
Okay.
And that's because it's like looking through a window. When you look through a window, you don't always see complete bodies. Yeah, am I looking like, and I might see half a body. Now, what is interesting, yeah, you're right. This kind of cropping is almost photographic. It almost already presupposes photographic sensitivity when you just photograph what fits in the viewfinder. You don't, and it's actually a good point, because in Rublev, everything was, the angel didn't have a leg outside the frame. Everything was inside. And here, but the more political dimension of this image is that as a person who looks at it, you get the impression that you live in a very well-ordered society. Everything fits together. Everything is there for a reason. Your reason and the reason of the painting become somehow merged into one, and also merged with the reason of the state. Just as the painting is reasonable in representing a picture in an accurate way that makes perfect sense, so the state is reasonable in writing down, in passing down laws to tell you how to behave in order to keep everything together. So in a sense, this kind of painting, Lyotard says in the essay, this kind of painting instills obedience. It says, follow the logic of the state, because this logic keeps everything together, because this logic keeps everything ordered and in the right place. It's interesting, isn't it? It's quite an unusual way of thinking. And it also suggests, what does it mean to make political art? Because this, according to Lyotard, this is political art. It is political in the conservative sense. It is political because it reinforces the values of the state, where everything has to come together, everything has to be reasonable. Now, if you are living at this time and you want to make something different, you want to be subversive, this understanding suggests that you need to paint in a different way. We might get to it in a minute or so. Any questions? So, what time you normally finish these lectures? 1:45? Yes. 1 second. Huh? 1:45. 1:45. Okay. So yes.
Yeah, about the, we call it as Byzantine painting, because
Which painting?
Byzantine.
Byzantine, yeah.
Yeah, because I developed in the years of Byzantine.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Yeah.
Also, the painters of the age paint in a way to respect the divine
Yes.
element. You know, like to give you an example, Holy Mary as a baby is depicted as a normal person,
Yeah.
but in a smaller size.
Okay. What's the question?
Yes. It was a question, just was a comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, now this way of painting, as in Jacques-Louis David, obviously continued for quite some time, beginning with the Renaissance, and then at around the mid-19th century, another paradigm shift happens, and this time, a different form of art emerges, but I'm not going to talk about the Impressionists because I don't like them. I'm going to talk about the movement in mid-20th century that we know as Fluxus. Anyone here knows the Fluxus movement? You should, because Fluxus is you, or at least you should be. So the Fluxus movement is people like John Cage, Yoko Ono, Joseph Beuys, Namjoon Palik. Now, this group of people said that their paradigm shift was to stop thinking about the image as an image, about the image as a picture. I think Marcel Duchamp belongs to the Fluxus, even though he was kind of earlier, but he really the spiritual father of this movement. And I think Dean showed you some Duchamp. I think there was the urinal. And so I'm not going to talk about that. But their battle cry was promote a revolutionary flawed and tide in art, promote living art and anti-art. Yeah. Now I think Central Sun Arting, especially in its sort of current form, if you go to the degree shows, that really it's kind of its creed, the anti-art moment, and it's quite helpful to look at the manifesto. You can find it all online very easy, but also at something like that. Anyone knows who that is? Okay, can someone just say it loudly? Pasquale. Yeah. First name? Jean-Michel Pasquale. Good. So Jean-Michel Pasquale was a New York graffiti artist. He was kind of embraced by Andy Warhol and did some amazing works. And compare that to the Death of Socrates. So here we have Death of Socrates, a marvelous painting. And here we have Pasquale, another marvelous painting. Now, what I'm suggesting is that the difference between Rubleau's icon and the Death of Socrates, and the difference between the Death of Socrates and Pasquale is quite interesting. How did we arrive at that? We already had the Jacques-Louis David making this marvelous painting that is just so real you can almost walk into this space. How did we get from that to this? So Fluxus happened. A revolution happened. It became impossible to paint in the way of Jacques-Louis David. It became unsustainable for whatever reasons. But you can see how this painting is also putting forward a form of politics. And I think what is interesting is how it is using both very familiar visual tropes like a cowboy hat, or a grid, or a chain, and writing, and how he uses very childlike brushstroke. And this juxtaposition of elements, and in Jacques-Louis David, everything, as we said, everything comes together to create one homogeneous picture of perfection. The state is perfect. You are a perfect citizen. The ruler is perfect, and everything makes sense. Here, you get a completely different message. Nothing makes sense. Things come together for no apparent reason. There is no logic. There is no overarching logic to make sense of it. Yeah? No. There is, of course, overarching logic to make sense of it, and this is the logic of capital. Because this painting today probably cost just as much as the painting by Jacques-Louis David, if not more. I think last time it was sold for 20 million or something like that, maybe 200 million. Doesn't matter. But yeah, so that it is important to bear in mind that the logic of the art market, in a sense, obliterates the differences between all these works. but this is something that can make us oblivious to the more nuanced differences that are going on here. So unlike in Jacques-Louis David, here nothing fits together, and that becomes the powerful message of this work. Now, what I want to know about you, or what I think you should ask yourself, is that do you work in a way that makes things fit together? Because if you do, you might want to allow yourself not to. Yeah? Things don't need to fit together. They can just be completely unrelated, and it's fine. It may be even great. So, but how did we arrive at a situation that this kind of work becomes an image or becomes an art? So, again, drawing from what Lyotard says in his essay, the presentation unpresentable. Let's go to a very simple question. Let's ask, how do you make something into an image? So, okay, here is my faithful flask. Okay. So, here is a flask. So, at the moment, I can open it, I can drink from it. So, it's my flask. How do I make it into an image? It's a question. You can try to answer. Yes?
To frame it, to put it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Draw it.
Huh?
Draw it.
Draw it. Anyone else? Sorry? Photograph. Okay. Good. What else?
Put it in a gallery.
Put it in the gallery. Good. Okay. Anyone else? Photocopy. Yeah. Yeah. Any other ways to make this into an image?
Dream it.
Okay. How does that work?
You see it.
Okay.
Close your eyes and imagine it.
Okay. All right. Sorry. What was that one? CCTV footage. Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
You just have to look at it.
Look at
It's
it.
an image.
And it's an image. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, for a very long time, the way to make something like this into an image was to represent it. So, what people normally were taught in art schools is how to represent. So, you would be sent in a traditional art school. You would be in your first year, sent to a gallery and told to copy paintings to learn how representation works, and later on to paint vases and statues, and then people in live drawing, and gradually you learn how to represent well. So that was the training of an artist, to learn how to represent. All this, in a sense, all this way of thinking about art as a representation kind of collapsed when photography was invented. Because suddenly you didn't need 20 years of training to represent something like this well. Because, think how long it takes to learn to draw it with the shade, with the shadows, with the volume, with all the different textures, with the shiny and the rubbery. So once photography was invented and suddenly it became possible to just take a picture of something, this whole tradition of representation as the main artistic training became redundant. Now, it's not disappeared. There are still art schools where that is the bulk of artist training. So, just like with Aristotelian science, not everyone chooses to do science in a new way. It just becomes progressively less interesting and less relevant. So, when photography since photography was invented and this training in representation became redundant, a new way of making something into an image became important. And I think here Duchamp is absolutely fundamental, because he said, essentially, if you want to make something into an image, you need to do this. And the moment you do this, you already have an image. So the image is not representation, but something else. Because this is now an image. Now, it's not the best frame. I wanted to have a frame without this. I didn't want to have a window. I just wanted to have a normal frame, but that's what they found. So you have to just use imagination. Sorry? Context? It's not so much the context. It's that what happens. So here's here's my flask that I can drink from. What happens when it goes here? It becomes a concept. Yeah. So once it's here, you can say, okay, so what does it mean? But when I hold it in my hand, no one asks, but what does it mean? Everyone knows the flask. I'm just going to drink from it. Yeah. No one asks, what this means. But the moment it's in the frame, you can ask how it is composed, why it is here and not here, why it is in a particular way, in a particular light. Suddenly the whole series of questions we ask about this object is completely different. When I hold it in my hand, you might ask, can I have a sip? You know, that might be a main reaction. You know, we have no coffee. Can I have a coffee? But once it's here, completely different set of questions become important. Why is it placed the way it's placed? Why is it in the frame? What is the meaning of it? And why do we suddenly start to ask about meaning and not can I have some coffee? Because it is in the frame. And the frame operates as something that in computing we call a black box. You know the term black box? Black box is this closed environment that you input information in, and what comes out, you input data in, and what comes out is information. So for instance, your pocket calculator, you input 2 plus 3, what comes out is 5. How did it do it? We don't know. No one knows. I mean, maybe some people know, but we don't know how it actually managed to arrive at that. If I open my calculator with a screwdriver, there will be nothing that tells me how it arrived at this calculation. There will be some wires, some condensers, but how that calculates that 7 minus 2 is 5, I don't know. It's a black box. Does it make sense? Yeah? Now, our life is full of black boxes. Your head is one of them as well. But what I'm trying to suggest is that Duchamp made us realize that a frame is a kind of black box. Here I have my flask, and you know, it just functions as a normal vessel for drinking. And suddenly, at some point, it just arrives inside the frame. And the frame receives an input from outside. The input can be anything. In that case, it's this object. And it is now outputs some information. So suddenly, this thing, from being an object, a thing, or data, it became information. How an object becomes information? By getting itself into a frame. So, what does it mean to talk about information and data? That requires some clarification. What is the difference between data and information? Data, from the Latin datum, is something given. Data is something given. And datum means to give. So data is given. So this is data. This is data. The world is data. When it becomes information, is when part of it gets into a black box and gets output as meaning. Yeah. So maybe what artists do is convert bits of data to bits of information. I don't know, maybe that is a kind of working definition of art practice. You take bits of the real world, that can be pigment or stone or brick or your own hair or whatever, fingernails, and you basically ask what it means. Yeah, everyone trims their nails, but you might trim your nails and collect them and put them in a little file, in a little bottle, and put it on the shelf with a label. The artists do this kind of shit. And then suddenly it stops being fingernails that someone just chopped in the bathroom. We stand in front of it in the gallery. It's about the passing of time, or it's about mortality, it's about flesh, it's very sensual. How much? So maybe that's art, to take data and make it into information. And how data becomes information? Well, at the very, very simple, basic level, you need to get it into a frame. Now, it doesn't have to be this kind of frame, a wooden frame or a square frame. A frame can have different manifestations. As someone said here, as Zach was saying, a gallery is also a kind of frame. So there is a famous story from a few years ago, how someone, a kind of prankster, left their glasses like this on the floor of a gallery. Did you hear about it? Yeah, someone left glasses on the floor of a gallery, and and obviously a few minutes later, people were kind of looking at it and taking pictures and discussing it, because that they wanted to understand what it means. What does it mean? This pair of glasses on the floor. Is it about us not seeing what is going on? And why? Because if you see a pair of glasses lying on the floor, on the street, on the pavement, you're not going to stop and think, oh, I wonder what it means. I'm going to think really hard about the message here. No, you're going to take them if you are a good person and go to the nearby corner shop and leave them there for safekeeping, or take them to a lost and found. But in the gallery environment, you're not going to take them to lost and found. You're going to look at it, trying to understand what it means. Yeah? Why? Because the gallery itself operates as a black box or a white cube, which is the same thing. And another way to make data into information is to put it on a stage. On a stage, in a cage. The moment something is being put on a pedestal, like the fourth plinth in the Trafalgar Square, the famous fourth plinth, that's been used by artists for quite a long time, essentially to explore what a plinth means. So the moment you put something on the plinth, it stops being an object, it becomes something else. Yeah? A plinth, a pedestal, these kind of things, they also operate as a black box. Questions about it so far? Yes?
Can information become data again?
Can information become data again?
Like, does it go?
Yes, these days it can. Well,
would you then go, oh, I have a copy, or it's now been transformed into something?
it's a really interesting question, and I think the way to find an answer is to make an artwork. If you can turn information into data, then it can happen. So that's my answer. You need to try to do it. But I don't see why not. I think it should be absolutely possible. But what is important is that really gives you the minimum definition of what it means to be an artist. It's to take data and make it into information. Because why I think this definition is helpful is because it suggests immediately that making art is about communicating. Making art is about accessing another person. Information is something that has a form. It needs to be understood. It has to travel somewhere. Yeah. So we're already not talking about self-expression. We talk about something else. We talk about reaching out, about a message. Okay, but we will put a few more layers of varnish on this definition in a few minutes. So, Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, from the same time roughly where Newton and Leibniz and Galileo and Kepler did their investigations, Immanuel Kant coined a nice little phrase that in a sense summarizes what the whole age of modernity is about. And he called it sapere aude. Sapere aude. And it means in Latin, well, sapere aude is in Latin, it means dare to know. To aude is like audacity, is to dare, and sapere is from knowledge. Dare to know. Have the courage to use your own understanding. In the Middle Ages, the knowledge or truth came from God. If you wanted to know the truth, you had to read the Bible. The Bible was the good book that had all the answers. And Kant is saying, if you want to break free from the slavery of the Middle Ages, if you want to break free from feudalism, if you want to enter a new age in which you are the master of your destiny, you need to have the courage to find out answers for yourself. This is dare to know. It means use your own abilities to study the world. That's how we arrive at a painting like the Jacques-Louis David. This is the dare to know in action. Dare to know means dare to study the world, dare to use optics and geometry, dare to figure things out for yourself, not relying on divine providence, not relying on the authority of the priest or the father or God or the good book, but figuring things for yourself. So the whole visual regime of the classical painting is based on this Kantian notion to find out things for yourself. And as I told you earlier, this painting is all about the viewer, because it presents you this complete, full picture where there are no missing elements. Everything fits together. And this is what Jean-Francois Lyotard says in this essay that I asked you to read. Painting obtained its letters of nobility, was placed among the fine arts, was given almost princely rights during the Quattrocento. Since then, and for centuries, it made its contribution to the fulfillment of the metaphysical and political program for the organization of the visual and the social. So the painting, Lyotard says, has the role, has the responsibility to communicate a political and visual and social program. So the painting that shows you reality as it is and uses a representation to create an exact replica of something that happened, does so in order to establish a visual order which is specific and precise and accurate, and it is exactly the same as a political order. So when you work realistically, when you work photographically, without perhaps being aware of it, you also as reinforce our belief in things which are in the right place, in the right way, properly organized. You always contribute to reinforcing the belief in the political as it is. So there is something inherently conservative in representational work, in representational painting, or in, let's say, documentary photography. It is inherently conservative because it is, because everything fits together, everything is there for a reason. It always follows one predetermined rule, and it's the same rule that it's the same logic that also allows the government to pass laws, allows the parliament to be in charge of your destiny. So this is quite interesting in that context, because that is the frontispiece, the book cover of a book of Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes was a British or English philosopher from the 16th century, Thomas Hobbes, marvelous thinker. And his book, Leviathan, introduced to the world the concept of utopia. That's where the notion of utopia is coming from. And in a sense, here you can see David's painting of Marat, of the Death of Socrates, kind of in reverse. Because here, what you see is the king. You see the king towering above the kingdom. I'm looking at the top of the image. The king is rising above his kingdom. He's holding a sword in one hand. He's holding a scepter in the other. And if you look closely, here it's very hard to see because it's a small image. But if you look closely, the body of the king is made of all the people. So all the body is made of tiny little heads. And all these heads are looking at him. If you Google this image and zoom in, you will see it's all made of heads looking at him. So the king is made of the bodies of all his subjects. Yeah, it's almost like he ate them, or they together comprise the king. So you see, yeah, you get here the sense of this unity. The kingdom is one person. The person is king. Everyone is subordinate to the will of the king. And why people accept that? Why normal people like you and me accept that someone, which is another normal person, going to be in charge of all our destinies? Why do we accept that we are just a tiny speck in the body of this mighty king? Well, Lyotard says the reason we accept it is because we've been indoctrinated by this kind of image that shows us how everything comes together and everything is logically arranged. And the logic, the rational logic of this painting is undeniable. The visual pleasure it gives us is undeniable. It's somehow so soothing to look at, even though it is about someone going to kill themselves. Yeah, we just notice how soothing it is, how everything is there for a reason, how everything is so realistic, how looking at the painting, we really feel that we are present there. It almost works like a time machine that's transporting us to this Athens in Greece 2,500 years ago. And the pleasure we derive from this image in some way convinces us in the righteousness of this representational model. And the same logic that makes us see how everything is coming together for our own gaze. When I'm standing there, all these elements are fit together for my own reason, for my own logic, for my own mind. In the Leviathan cover, we see how, in a sense, the invisible aspect of the same painting is manifest in the king being made of all the subjects. So you have here a kind of political program of the representational artwork. The representational painting is, or the representational artwork or the photograph is inherently politically conservative, because it inherently promotes the notion of order and the notion of a logic that is given from outside that is inevitable and everyone must follow it. Yes?
Isn't it paradoxical that the content of that painting is Socrates, whose mode of education is the questioning, and and think for yourself,
Yeah.
because you're replacing the authority of the God with the authority of the king,
Absolutely right.
the just society, but the corruption that is there.
Yeah.
It's,
It is paradoxical, yeah. There's no denying that. But I could show you any other painting. And I think it's especially paradoxical in the case of the Socrates. But all classical painting follows exactly the same visual logic. But you're right. I mean, there are many paradoxes there to be found. The point that Lyotard is putting across, and I think that's the most important thing he wants us to understand, is that our aesthetic choices in making art are never free from political implications. So the politics of an artwork are not in what you choose to represent. You know, your work becomes political not when you make a caricature of Trump, for instance. Not that is political. What is political is how you make it. And if you choose to work with representation, it's bound to be conservative.
So whatever the motive.
Whatever the motive, yeah. You can represent, you know, workers on strike storming the Winter Palace. It's still conservative because it's using a representational paradigm that reinforces a hierarchical structure. So, yes.
Even if it's fragmented, even if those.
Well, if it's fragmented, then it is already not representational or not fully representational. Yeah. Now, once you start subverting the representational paradigm, even in tiny ways, yeah, you open a can of worms. And for instance, montage will be people like Adorno, whom we don't really look at, but he is kind of important for Lyotard. Adorno will say a montage or a collage has a much more revolutionary potential than a straight photograph. Because in the collage, different elements that don't belong together normally are put together in one frame, and that gives some kind of idea that things can coexist without all being logically drawn together. Because according to people like Lyotard, this previous image by David, the Death of Socrates, is also kind of racist. Why is it racist? Because it's so uniform, and everything is there for a reason. Nothing can come into it from outside. It said, what if there was, I don't know, a big splatter of ink in the middle of it? Or if there was, let's say, you know, something sticking out. If it was something sticking out and still allowed to remain in the frame, that gives you some idea that you don't need to be homogeneous to belong. You don't, but the political message of the representational classical work is that you need to be, as identity is more important than difference. Whatever is different is not allowed in. Now, I don't want to bring contemporary politics here, but it would be quite easy to draw political parallels with movements that are, let's say, that are pro kind of homogeneity, or against foreigners, or against immigration, and see how it maps out on an approach to art that seeks to have everything for a reason and everything coming together in a logical and organized way. And on the other hand, something like Basquiat seems to put forward a worldview where unrelated elements can all be part of the same image. They don't need to all be drawn by the same hand, or come from the same place, or even make any kind of sense. Yeah? So, yes?
Oh, I don't want to interrupt. There's something else.
No, 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 no.
Well, I can't really quote a page from that essay. I can't say I understood it that well, but I kind of drew the conclusion that the imagery that political power, or well, I guess consumers' powers in our case and our day and age, kind of uses changes, and therefore it's completely different. Like I would kind of, having read that, I would say that it's completely different what representational drawing means today
That's right.
than before.
But
So
that's
now,
what, yeah.
for example, we see the authorities will use like Photoshop images of people,
Yeah.
which are not representational. They've been edited
Okay.
to kind of smoothing purposes and kind of feel-good purposes, a bit like the painting I looked at, but within the different aesthetic ideal. So I don't know. I feel like representational drawing is exactly what, like it seems quite revolutionary
Okay.
in our time.
Okay, I see what you mean. So maybe you say, maybe now, okay, it could be. I think, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by, are you saying that kind of the dominant form of images is non-representational?
Yes.
Okay, maybe. I guess that's something that could be explored further. But, and you say, so now, to truly revolutionary work actually has to be conservative.
Well, no, that's not the only way to be revolutionary, but I guess
Let's just say, because I think it can become a little bit complicated to discuss in this open forum. But let's just say that for Lyotard, the first thing I guess we all agree on, that how you make art is never non-political question. How art is made is a political question. More so than what is it about. It's not the content that is political, Lyotard is saying, it's how something is made. Would you agree with that? Okay, good. So that I think is the most important takeaway. So then, you know, when you go back to your studio or to your laptop, what Lyotard is saying is that it's not the subject that you need to worry about so much, but how you make it, or in what way your making becomes the work itself. So what Lyotard is calling us to consider, or what he considers the power of art in a political context, or the point at which art becomes a political force, is the point where art is able to show how it is made. When making becomes more important than content. Think about it in a different framework. For instance, there's a lot of building construction work going on around King's Cross, where we are now. Yeah. So you know, at the moment there are all these cranes and scaffolding, but at some point they will finish building. They will remove the cranes. They will remove the scaffolding, and you will have a neat, shiny building sitting there as if it was kind of immaculate conception, as if it was just dropped like this, without any trace of how it was made. But if we follow Lyotard's logic, he will say, well, why not leave the scaffolding? Why not keep building the building all the time? Why finish building? Why the making of the building couldn't be part of the building? Why should we take away the cranes? Why do we need to hide so that something is made? Now, where's my phone? Now you probably have an iPhone or some kind of phone in your pocket. And marvelous as it is, this device, it can tell you everything about everything. You can ask it any question in the world, and it will tell you exactly the answer. But try asking it how it was made. How much people who made it could pay. Where are they? What they look like. Ask Siri. Ask Alexa, whatever. You know. And there is no answer. Why? Because everything to do with how the phone was produced was surgically removed from the phone. You go to the Apple store, and it is like a temple. So there are all these sort of aggressively polite people, and everything. They all wear this kind of black, like some kind of enlightened monks from the future. And you know, they demonstrate all this technology, but one thing you're never going to see is a picture of a factory where the phone is being assembled. And as you probably know, in the Foxconn factories where the phones are being assembled, people jump from the windows because they cannot take the work conditions. But that is not going to be the welcome screen on your phone. You're not going to see the picture of the person who's probably, let's say, a person of your age, you know, a young person of Chinese origin, you know, with nimble fingers, soldering all these, you know, connections. You will not see them on the screen saying, "Hi, I hope you like my phone, the phone I made for you. I hope you enjoy using it." The whole production is being surgically removed. And Lyotard says, this is politics. The removal of all traces of production, that's what makes conservatism. And political action is about bringing production into the world. Now we can look at some examples how it is done, but Fluxus is precisely the movement that Yoko Ono, Joseph Beuys, Jan Palik, they are the people who started to work on this question. How do you bring production into practice? Laura?
I think that if you just put a finished work in front of people, what it contributes to is cultural illiteracy. So you will just deny the fact that our world is a constant form of production and exchange.
Yes. I think that's what I was saying, no? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How are we doing for time? So this question of bringing the process into the work. Now, there are many current examples of artists who make the process their work. For instance, do you know the work of No, wait. I'm going to take a little bit more recent. Do you know, for instance, Thomas Hirschfeld? Hirschhorn. Something. Thomas Hirschhorn. Hirschhorn. Yeah. Do you know Thomas Hirschhorn? He's a brilliant character. I think I didn't spell it right, but so Thomas Hirschhorn makes installations that are continuously in a state of disrepair. He had a piece in Paris that was, I think it was called Gramsci Monument to the Italian philosopher, communist philosopher Antonio Gramsci. And the monument, look, this is very interesting because think about it in relation to your degree show and how you could confuse everyone. Instead of putting his work in the gallery with everyone else, he made this monument in a slum neighborhood on the suburb of Paris. Let's say like a half an hour or an hour ride from the gallery. So to see it, the gallery visitors had to take a taxi, go to this neighborhood where this monument was installed, and then negotiate with another taxi driver how to come back. And the monument was in a suburb, in a kind of low-rise council estate where artists never go, where normally art never happens. And by placing it there, he made the gallery audience this sort of reified, well-heeled, very cultured people who never venture outside the 5 central boroughs of Paris to go to a neighborhood that they never normally visit, and they had to talk on the way to some kind of Turkish cab driver, and then they went there and they had to buy a cup of tea. So he created an experience that made people leave their comfort zone, and that becomes possible because the practice of the making becomes the artwork itself. Or do you know the work of Santiago Sierra? Yeah. So Sierra, he's a Spanish artist, and he was given a pavilion in the Venice Biennale, and he did several very interesting works there. But in one of the works, I think he was given the pavilion after someone else finished exhibiting there, and it was just, as a space looks after a show was taken down. There was sort of unpainted walls. So he closed all the doors. He put 2 guards at the front, and you had to come in with your passport. You had to get it stamped, and you had to have a Spanish visa or something to gain access into the space. So in another installation, he paid homeless people in Venice to stand in line in the gallery, and he tattooed a line on their backs. So, I mean, the Hirschhorn and Santiago Sierra, they're interesting to explore, and I'm just throwing their names out for you to go and do some additional investigations, because in them specifically, the process becomes the artwork. There is nothing finished, there is nothing commodified that you can buy. Rather, what they offer you to engage with is a process. Now, through Lyotard, we can understand that there is a political agenda to this kind of work, because it shifts the attention from the object, which is always a representation of something or other, to how the object is produced. It shifts the attention from what something means to how it is made. It is almost as, there is this strange, dubious practice of studio visit. It's almost as if the studio visit is the artwork, but instead of visiting the studio, the artwork itself is a kind of visit. So, in a sense, this paradigm shift we are talking about today is a move from the image as a representation to an image as information. And we saw that information happens when data gets into a frame and comes out. We also saw that information happens when the focus shifts to the process from the image. Now, this is very interesting because it suggests a way of working that whatever it is you are doing, maybe you are a committed abstract impressionist painter. We have a few of those. Now, okay, perhaps all you want to do is to continue doing your abstract impressionist paintings. Fine. But is there a way to bring the process of making into the work? Now, you might say that abstract impressionism is all about that already, because what it records is the chaotic movements of the body of the painter against the canvas. But what if, for instance, you document or find a way of recording yourself in the act of making? What if the recording in the act of making itself acquires the status of the work? What if the work stops being the end result and becomes the process? Now you might be, your day might comprise of waking up in the morning, having a cup of tea and the toast, getting out of the house, going to the studio, and then doing some painting. But what if getting up in the morning, having a cup of tea, toast, and going to the studio is as much an artwork as what is happening in the studio? Yeah? At what point you decide, okay, what happened until now is not the artwork, this is an artwork, and then when I go home and stop in Tesco to buy some groceries, it's not an artwork. Where this cutoff point, where do you execute this cutoff point? That's, I think, that is the problem. This is the problem of the studio. And if you have a studio, then you need to think about the rigid way of thinking it imposable. Because the studio suggests that only that which happens inside the studio is an artwork. The studio is the frame. Yeah? A piece of canvas gets into the studio and becomes an art object. But can you work against the oppression of the studio? Can you break away from it? Can you expand your artwork so whatever happens outside the studio, or can you at least investigate where this cutting off point happens? Now, my students are quite fortunate in as much as we don't have a studio. We don't have studios on my course. We have one shared workspace, and we do everything there together, and we have to collaborate. Sorry? And we have to collaborate, and we have to work together, and we don't have this kind of isolated altar that you go in and you do something. So our work is always immediately considered in a social context, in the way it is received and looked at, and it always has to take into account everything else that is going on in the same space. But if you are working in a studio, then I think it's a very important question to ask. Where are the edges of your artwork? And can you play with them? Can you expand them? Can you, or are you going to be, would you submit to this authority? Because make no mistake, the space of the studio is a form of power. And by entering your studio, you submit to this power. So can you rebel against it? Can you step out of it? Or at least be conscious of the way it influences the decisions you make once you are in the studio. Okay, I think probably that is a good place to draw a line. Any questions? No questions? Okay, yes.
For example, the dividend photo,
Yeah.
Is that a representation as well?
Yeah.
Because it represents.
Well, not all representation is photographic. What it represents is the authority and the power of the king. Yes?
Is data kind of representation then?
Data is not representation. This is data. Data, or Duchamp's ready-made, for instance. The ready-made is a really interesting object to think about, and we'll look at it maybe next week, because the ready-made, like the stool with the bicycle wheel, they are data. They function both as data and as information all at the same time. They really break away from the diktat of the studio, because they are not studio-produced objects. They are kind of living room-produced objects, which is a completely different story. Any other questions? Yes?
When did Lyotard write Perception?
I think, well, Lyotard was right. His creative period is from the late 50s to 1984 when he died. So I think he wrote it probably in the 70s.
So I was thinking about what he's saying about the camera,
Yeah.
and it's been, he sees it's quite objective,
Yeah.
which we now question.
Yeah. It's not that we question the objectivity of the camera. It's not a question if you park on a double yellow and you are taken to court, you cannot say, well, actually, I want to question the objectivity of the camera. If it shows your camera on a double yellow, you will have to pay a fine.
But in terms of like how we now look at skin tones of different camera films and the technology that has certain biases within it, that it's not such a pure scientific project as he's writing.
Yes, well, I guess what the way to understand Lyotard is he says photography released painting from representation and allowed it to discover its own essence as basically a philosophical meditation of what does it mean to be an artist.
Well, that
One
question
second.
is now back.
1 second. And now what is happening now in our own age, and this is the paradigm shift we inhabit right now, is that because of the network digital technology, because of all this computational algorithmic environment we live in, photography now is released from this representational task. And photography itself is becoming the art form of the future. Because it's, as we say, it stops performing this representational task. So the paradigm shift of the present moment, which is to do with the way algorithms and data and surveillance capitalism take hold of our lives, really calls for a rethinking of what does it mean to be an art form. And that rethinking has to be has to understand the photograph or the photographic image and the role it plays in all these surveillance frameworks. Any other questions?
Yeah. I feel that the kind of notion of the process of production as one of the objectives of art today derives from a kind of Marxist notion where the process of production is glorified. And I, along with millions of others who grew up as socialists and Marxists, became disillusioned with that notion because it didn't explain a whole bunch of other things, such as how the process of production destroys the planet. And I'm just wondering how, whether the thinking extends to that.
I think it does, but you don't think so? When I was talking about the production of the iPhone, so you say that it's better not to know how your iPhone is made.
No, quite the opposite. I'm saying that the process of production is not the be-all and end-all.
Who said that?
And that there are other ways of representing what is happening that are as valid. That's all I'm saying.
I don't have any objection to that, and I don't think the point is not that the process of production has to be somehow glorified, but that it needs to be, not that it needs to be, but that bringing the process of production into the fold of the artwork makes it for that's where the political dimension of the artwork lies. That is the message in this Lyotard's text. Now it's true that production is something that Marxism has a lot to say about, but not only, because you can find that very similar sentiment in Heraclitus, if you like. So disillusionment from Marxism might not necessarily mean abandonment, complete lack of interest in production. And you are right to say that production is also that what destroys the planet, but perhaps, especially because of that, we should pay close attention to how production does what it does. Any other questions? Okay, guys, Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. See you next week. No, in 2 weeks' time. Don't clap. Don't clap. Yes.
Two quick questions.
Okay.
So the representation is, so it doesn't welcome foreigners. Is that the why you chose the?
Can you ask me, let's say tomorrow? Yes.
I just wanted to grab your email response.